For 3 centuries, the Vikings terrorized Europe. They burned cities, they shattered kingdoms, they rewrote maps. And then, on a single day in 1014, on the shores of Ireland, they lost everything. Not to an empire, not to a miracle weapon, but to exhaustion, betrayal, and time itself. This is the Battle of Clontarf, the clash that didn't just kill men, it ended an age. To understand Clontarf, you have to forget the idea of a united Ireland. In the year 1000, Ireland was a mosaic of rival kingdoms, petty kings, high kings, old blood feuds stretching back generations. And woven into this chaos were the Vikings. They had arrived in the late 8th century as raiders, burn, loot, vanish. But over time, they stayed. They built towns, Dublin, Waterford, Limerick. They married locals, converted to Christianity, spoke Gaelic. By 1000, many Vikings in Ireland weren't outsiders anymore. They were Norse-Gaels, hybrid warriors, traders, kings. And they were powerful. One man dared to challenge that power, Brian Boru. Born into the Kingdom of Munster, Brian grew up watching Vikings burn Irish monasteries to the ground. His brother was killed fighting them. Brian learned early, Ireland would never know peace while Vikings ruled its coasts. Through war, alliances, and sheer force of will, Brian rose, King of Munster, then King of most of Ireland. By 1002, he claimed the ultimate title, High King of Ireland. But power like that breeds enemies. Brian's rule was strong, but fragile. In the north, Mael Secnel, the former High King, waited patiently. In Leinster, King Mael Morda despised Brian's dominance. And in Dublin, the Norse king Sigtryg Silkbeard plotted revenge. Sigtryg knew he couldn't defeat Brian alone, so he did what Vikings had always done best. He called for help. Across the Irish Sea, across the North Atlantic, from the Viking heartlands. Warriors answered. From the Orkney Islands came Sigurd the Stout, Earl of Orkney, carrying a legendary raven banner said to guarantee victory, but doom its bearer. From the Isle of Man came Brodie of Man, pagan, ruthless, clad in mail so fine no blade could cut it. This would not be a local Irish squabble. This would be a Viking last stand. The armies gathered near Dublin at Clontarf, flat coastal land, bordered by the sea. It was Good Friday, a day meant for peace. Instead, it became one of the bloodiest days in Irish history. Brian Boru was 73 years old, too old to fight. He stayed behind, praying in his tent, while his sons and allies marched to war. On one side, Irish forces loyal to Brian, Munster warriors, Dál Cais infantry, and former rivals turned allies. On the other, a terrifying coalition, Dublin Norse, Leinster rebels, and hardened Viking mercenaries from across the sea. Steel glittered, war horns sounded, the tide crept slowly inland. The fighting started at dawn. Shield walls crashed together, axes split shields, spears punched through mail. The Vikings were professionals, disciplined, heavily armored. The Irish relied more on speed, aggression, and sheer numbers. At first, the Norse held the line. Sigurd of Orkney pushed forward beneath the raven banner. Every step soaked the ground in blood. But the banner demanded a price. One by one, those who carried it fell, and the tide began to turn. The battle raged for hours. Neither side broke, but something deadly was happening in the background. The tide was going out. Viking ships, beached earlier for easy retreat, were now stranded far from the shore. The Norse realized too late. When they tried to flee, the sea had abandoned them. Irish forces pressed harder. Panic spread. What had been a battle became a slaughter. Sigurd the Stout was cut down while holding the cursed banner. Brodie of Man fought his way off the field, but fled inland, hunted by Irish warriors. The Viking line collapsed. By afternoon, Clontarf was a graveyard. Thousands lay dead, both Irish and Norse. And then, tragedy struck. As the battle ended, Brodie of Man found Brian Boru's tent. The High King was praying, unarmed. Brodie killed him where he knelt. The man who won Ireland's freedom never saw the victory. Militarily, Brian's side won. The Viking coalition was shattered. Foreign Viking power in Ireland was broken forever. But the cost was enormous. Brian's heirs died. Ireland fractured again into rival kingdoms. And the Vikings, well, they didn't vanish. They adapted. Dublin remained a Norse-Gaelic city, now traders instead of conquerors. The Viking Age didn't end in silence. It ended in exhaustion. Clontarf wasn't just a battle, it was a turning point. After 1014, Vikings no longer reshaped Europe by force. Raids faded, empire stabilized. The age of longships gave way to the age of kings. Ireland would remember Brian Boru not as a flawless ruler, but as the man who stood at the end of the Viking road and said, "This is the end." The Vikings didn't disappear because they were defeated. They disappeared because the world changed. Clontarf marked that moment when legend met reality, when the old gods lost their grip, when the age of fire finally burned out. If you enjoy cinematic history that goes beyond dates and names, if you want to understand not just what happened, but why it mattered, subscribe to the channel, because history isn't dead, it's just waiting to be remembered.